Dr. Andrew Bostom. He is with me today. He's a first-time visitor on this program. Dr. Bostom, are you with us?
Yeah.
Welcome to the KKNT Lisa Benson radio show for National Security Matters.
Thanks for having me on, Lisa.
You're an MD, MS, an Islamic scholar, medical doctor, and researcher, and author of several books, including the most recent book, Iran's Final Solution for Israel, The Legacy of Jihad and Shiite Islamic Jew Hatred in Iran. I read the book. I thank you for sending it to me. It is riveting. It is meticulously written, and there are narratives in here that every American needs to listen to, and it came at a time, very interestingly, yesterday, Dr. Bostom, I heard Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. retired, Ralph Peters answer a question on Fox News. It struck me as a great segue into our conversation today. Lieutenant Peters was asked, is there a secret deal that Secretary of State John Kerry made with Iran on behalf of the Obama administration that we don't know about? And Lieutenant Peters answered resoundingly, yes, of course. He went on to say, Persians live in a merchant culture and always sizing up and down their customer. In looking at how the United States has been behaving during these Iranian negotiations, it became clear to the Iranians that the United States was a pushover. And I just finished your book, and I said to myself, wait a minute. They may be they may be pushed over and think we're pushovers as Persian merchants, but they forgot the core Sharia totalitarianism guiding their negotiation tactics. So may I call you Andy, Dr. Bostom?
Sure.
Andy, let's first explain to the listeners who listen week after week, who are still trying to understand the difference between Sunni Islam of ISIS, the Islamic State, actually, and Shia Islam of Iran. Let's give a briefing on that just for a few moments.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, in terms of the doctrines that are most relevant to what's going on right now, there is no difference. And actually, I would be curious, what did I didn't hear Peter's comment,
yes,
and I'm sort of baffled exactly what he was talking about. It sounds like, unfortunately, Lisa, as is typical of conservative analysts as well, he made absolutely no reference to Islam.
That's my point.
Is that a fair? No, because I didn't hear it. So is that a fair assessment?
That is my point. We're having a little bit of problem with the communication with you. Turn around 3 times. Make sure you get the cell tower. It's just a little bit hard for us to hear you. So I want to make sure, because your point in this book and what I heard Ralph Peters say on Fox News to Eric, who was sitting in, I think, for O'Reilly, was there was absolutely no commentary. And there hasn't been, Andy, any commentary at all from candidates. It's like nobody talks about the Islamic doctrine. And that's what I want to hear you talk about.
Well, within, so Lisa, is this better now? Can you hear me better?
I can, yes.
Okay, so within, we have to go back, because after all, this process is already well past the deadline. You have to remember, to refresh everyone's memory, the initial, much ballyhooed announcement was made on November 23rd, 24th of 2013. And at that point, we were told that, well, by last summer, everything would be wrapped up in a nice, tidy package with a final agreement. And of course, here we are. Now we're being told that, oh no, it's going to extend to a full year after that. But at any rate, within a few weeks of that announcement being made back in November of 2013, an Iranian analyst who used to be an advisor, it's hard to keep track of who's moderate and who's not moderate, but certainly President Khatami was referred to as a moderate. So a former advisor to President Khatami and a former advisor to also one of Khatami's cabinet members, also deemed a moderate, many moderates, the whole gaggle of moderates here, was discussing the interim agreement at that point, about 3 weeks after it was originally announced, and he referred to it as quote the Treaty of Hudaybiyyah, to be followed by a conquest of Mecca.
Yes, I read that in your book. Yes, explain that, because not everybody will understand that.
Well, it's a very explicit reference to how Islam's prophet Muhammad dealt with truces, with armistices. And it became incorporated into the vast body of Islamic law on jihad warfare. And its principle is very simple. You only make a temporary truce when you are at a disadvantage, and you are obligated. Again, obligated. It's not even a question of deceit. You are obligated as a Muslim leader, as a Muslim society, to break such temporary armistices when you have a tactical, i.e. military advantage. And so this was brazenly announced. Again, literally within a few weeks of this alleged framework. Again, remember, we're talking already about a framework back in November of 2013, and here we are. We're still talking about a framework over a year later.
Yes.
So this analyst would go on to say something else very candid, which gets at the doctrine of deception also, or taqiyya, which is part of the jihad war doctrine. He said in the same interview, incidentally, for your information, when you conduct political negotiations with Iran, you lose even when you think you have won.
And
the Iranians have raised the level of uranium enrichment far beyond the level they really needed, so that it would be lowered. They would emerge victorious.
We're going to go to a break, Dr. Bostom. We'll be right back. This is a very important conversation, and it will help us talk to our lawmakers about a subject they do not want to talk about. Lisa Benson, KKNT, will be back in 3. Erica, I'm so busy reading Dr. Andy Bostom's book while I'm sitting here that I nearly forgot to come back on the air. Thank you for joining us. There's so many questions I have for Dr. Bostom today, because what I have noticed, and it took his book to enlighten me, and the book is Iran's Final Solution for Israel, The Legacy of Jihad and Shiite Islamic Jew Hatred in Iran. Andy, it can be obtained on Amazon, correct? Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
I recommend this book highly. Masterful book. It speaks to an issue, a core value that no one seems to talk about because it's too politically incorrect to talk about it, and that is Islamic doctrine is the reason why we cannot have a deal with Iran. Before we broke for our break, we were talking about the rules of engagement per Shia Islam. We didn't really discuss, as I wanted to, the difference between Sunni and Shiite, but there's when it comes to Sharia, there is no difference. It's more on the differences on who takes leadership or who is the follower. But am I correct on that, Andy?
Well, it has to do really with sort of what I refer to, at least for educational purposes, sort of inside Muslim baseball issues about the succession of the caliphate, who really was the rightly guided caliph. Where did that lineage break off? And of course that has led to internecine bloody warfare between Sunni and Shiites, which literally is still with us. Witness what's going on in Iraq and Yemen and Syria, etc. But honestly, I think that by and large is a very little, concern to non-Muslims.
Yes.
One other thing that this analyst said that I think is critically important, he alluded just almost in passing to the fact that Iran views itself as being in a, quote, fierce war with Americans on all levels. And Lisa, this is so critical when we ultimately get to the argument about what are the tactical solutions to the dilemma that we confront within Iran, in everyone's admission, on the cusp of obtaining nuclear weapons, and the idea that somehow, if there were to be, and I'll put my cards on the table, there really is only a military solution to the notion of Iranian infrastructure at this point. But whenever that issue is broached, no matter how gingerly, the question comes that that's tantamount to warmongering.
Yes.
And this really is so dishonest or disingenuous or just plain ignorant, because as this analyst remarks, Iran has been engaged in a jihad war with us, certainly in the modern period, since the Khomeini revolution.
And we all remember those days.
And that we cannot ever lose sight of that.
Yes. I speak about that often because I was at that point in college where I was really paying attention to world affairs. And those were defining moments in my life where you're watching the embassy being overthrown, and we're seeing and tremendous amounts of insight is gained if we just think back to that period of time. Andy, $11.9 billion has been given to Iran. It was Adam Credo who wrote in Free Beacon, the Obama administration has paid $490 million back in January in cash assets to Iran and released $11.9 billion to the Islamic Republic of Iran as these talks keep continuing and continuing and continuing. Would you speak to that for a moment?
I think that underscores how flimsy the idea of sanctions certainly is now, and I would argue ever since this again, the original so-called interim agreement was announced on November 24th of 2013. The sanctions essentially began to fall apart. What there was of them at that point, and it's only going to get increasingly worse. But we also have to take a step back and logically think. I think there's this trope that somehow Iran came to the table as a result of the sanctions. Whether there's a kernel of truth in that or not, the fact is that they had a pretty robust nuclear program at that point.
Yes.
We're now learning. As a matter of fact, there's a very interesting slide that was prepared by a former CIA analyst, Fred Fleitz, and it corroborates evidence. Fred is from a conservative think tank, so the Center for Security Policy, but it corroborates evidence from certainly a center-left institution, Harvard's Kennedy School, by Ali Heinonen. And essentially, they agree that Iran, since 2009, has now amassed, up to the point where we are in these so-called negotiations, enough low-enriched uranium to make about 10 weapons. So something's going on through that whole period, even when the sanctions were at their height. Again, it just sort of, the logical flow of all this for me is that even reimposing strict sanctions is really not going to be a solution to this problem, Lisa.
Well, they navigate around the sanctions. They've always navigated around.
Yes,
them.
they do, and they're very creative in how they do this. And also there's just a lot of avarice. Let's face it, that in terms of all the societies, countries that are willing to deal with them, they do have a very important commodity, oil and gas. That's why I don't think that sanctions are a solution to this problem.
No, and I have so many questions for you. We have 2 minutes to the next break. Before we go to the next break, wouldn't you talk to us a moment? Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, her position on Iran?
Oh, I don't think we're going to see anything. My understanding is that she was for this whole effort to launch into negotiations with Iran, which is so fundamentally flawed that I don't see there being really any a sliver of difference between what we're seeing right now and what she believed should have been pursued. And in fact, I'm as you know from the book, Lisa, I'm very critical of what the Bush II administration did. I think they sat on their hands when we could have done a lot of destruction, probably totally destroyed Iran's nuclear infrastructure. But at least to their credit, they did not make matters exponentially worse by engaging in these sham negotiations and giving Iran's nuclear program legitimacy.
When we come back, Dr. Bostom, we're going to talk about the Ayatollah Khamenei and his negotiations with North Korea while these negotiations were going on how to obtain a ballistic missile to deliver these weapons that we believe that they are very capable of creating. I'd like to remind our listeners today that this show is brought to you by the generosity of Benson. You're a host for this show this week and every week, and I am discussing with Dr. Andrew Bostom a most serious conversation on a nuclear Iran. For Israel, for Jews, for everyone in this world, we just came out of a potential framework, ladies and gentlemen, that it doesn't address the framework for Iran's intercontinental ballistic missile program, whose sole purpose is to carry nuclear payloads. It addresses nothing that will stop Iran from using the over $100 billion or more of unfrozen assets to fund jihad in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and elsewhere. It doesn't address that, and there may be a secret deal that we do not know. So my question, Andy, for you right now, and as you explain in this fascinating book, Iran's Final Solution for Israel, and then I want to talk more about Israel. In November, as you explain in your book, 9th, 2014, Iran's theocratic leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, reiterated via a tweet message. This is how we're dealing with a serious issue. A tweet message calling for jihad annihilation of Israel on his Twitter account. Quote, "Why should and how can #Israel be eliminated?" ? 9 key questions about elimination of Israel. End quote. We still went to negotiations. We never addressed that, did we, Andy?
Oh, no. And as a matter of fact, it came up recently with the idea that Netanyahu suggested, and I want to go back to his speech from the beginning from the beginning of March. But Netanyahu more recently suggested, well, why isn't Iran required to recognize Israel's basic right to exist as part of this whole framework, which obviously Israel has been left out of altogether? But he was I wouldn't say pleading, but he was pointing this out to the Obama administration, and that was quickly dismissed. Because honestly, Lisa, on one level, I think the Obama administration knows exactly what it's dealing with. It's just decided that it wants to broker some kind of deal, and it's willing to dismiss things that it clearly does recognize. In different comments about Iran, you actually do get some honesty from President Obama. But in the end, you have to take away the message that they're willing to deal with this rogue regime anyway. But what Netanyahu did in the speech that was very clarifying, I think, for the public, back at the beginning of March, is he underlined what I think are the ideological pillars of the regime. He certainly got 2 out of 3 of them. He mentioned the jihadism, and he actually made a very important juxtaposition to our liberty enshrining constitution. He was alluding to the Iranian constitution, which enshrines jihad in very, very clear and explicit terms, and its goal of bringing out the sovereignty of Allah's law to the globe. So international Sharia law, and it cites a specific Quranic verse from the 8th surah or chapter of the Quran, the 60th verse, which talks about striking terror into the heart of the infidel. And of course, what better way to do that than with nuclear weapons? But he referred specifically to Ayatollah Khamenei's Twitter account, which of course is used to spew this canonical Islamic Jew hatred that's come out of Iran for the last 500 years. The third pillar that he didn't allude to, and it's critically important, but it's a little maybe too abstract or unknown to general audiences, but I think it's important to your audience. And it also, you could see it from Ayatollah Khamenei's Twitter account. So the tweet you talked about was November just passed of 2014. Yes. A year before that, Khamenei tweeted out, Israel is the unclean, rabid dog of the region. And the use of the words unclean and dog are very significant in Shiite theology. First of all, a dog is a filthy animal like a pig, and najis means unclean. And it's not just talking about physical impurity, it's talking about spiritual impurity. And that is a critically important way that for at least 5 centuries since Iran became a 12-er Shiite theocracy in 1501, that's how non-Muslims, Jews in particular, have been dehumanized.
Oh, gosh. Hold on, Andy. We've got to go back to a break, and I want to come back to and talk about ICBMs, which they have. And this is so important. We'll be right back. Lisa Benson, KKNT with Dr. I encourage you to call in and speak to our guest, our esteemed analyst and Islamic scholar, Dr. Andrew Bostom, who has a fabulous book that is available on Amazon.com, Iran's Final Solution for Israel. He also has a blog, and he's a prolific writer, and every day there's something very interesting to read, and that would be www.andrewbostom.org. Andy, one of our colleagues just texted me and said to me, let's not forget that there are ICBMs that Iran already has, that's intercontinental ballistic missiles, and the ability, do you think, to spread anthrax or other stuff around the globe?
I want to address that real quick, and I want to get back to the point about najis, because we have to understand why they're doing all these things.
Yes.
So there was congressional testimony, I believe senatorial testimony, by the U.S. Department of Defense just within the past month, which said for certain that within this calendar year, Iran, which, as you alluded to earlier, has been working jointly with North Korea for many years on a ballistic missile program, Iran will have intercontinental ballistic missiles within this calendar year. Now, earlier in late January, what may be a bona fide image of an actual ICBM was captured by, it was alleged to be a weather satellite. I'm sure it's a spy satellite, an Israeli spy satellite, of a 27-meter tall ICBM, certainly looking object, on a launch pad outside Tehran. So you put those two pieces of evidence together, and this is a real possibility. You know, your wonderful Congressman Trent Franks, I went to a briefing that he gave about how the Iranian army crows about its ability to and its interest in generating an electromagnetic pulse, which you may have discussed with your audience, which basically is exploding a nuclear weapon in the atmosphere and frying the grid. And of course, that could be done via an ICBM. But Lisa, what I wanted to point out about how important this doctrine of the non-Muslims uncleanliness is, first of all, it has a long pedigree in Iran. Through 1923, Jews were ghettoized, they were badged, they wore yellow patches on their clothing centuries before Nazi Germany, and this was to identify them as being unclean. And what happened if they ventured out of their ghetto? Because rainwater and snow are considered to be vehicles for their physical impurity, they could be beaten, often severely. We have accounts through 1923. Well, fast forward 90 years to 2013. Ayatollah Khamenei issues a fatwa against the poor, benign, Pacific Baha'i minority in Iran, basically an eclectic religion that incorporates all religions, all major religions, and it's purely Pacific. They've been persecuted for 150 years in Iran. They are considered to be unclean. He issues a fatwa calling them a deviant sect. Yes. And the Baha'i are very big in the flower business worldwide and also in Iran. And a Baha'i flower business was shut down by edict after this fatwa was issued. Why, Lisa? Because as a florist, you're dealing with cuttings and water. It was felt the Shiite clientele wandering into that store might be made unclean. So this is a real living doctrine, and it's a form of dehumanization, and it applies to Americans as well.
No.
And so we know with totalitarian ideologies, whether they're Islamic or whether they're modern ideologies, that dehumanization is the first step before annihilation.
You talk about in your book, and that is such a good point, but you talk about the comparison of fighting communism and fighting this. Comment?
Yes, well, leave it to the era before cultural relativism and political correctness. Is that intellectuals at the beginning of the 20th century quickly recognized, as as Bolshevism, communism was emerging, that it bore striking similarities to Islam. In fact, there was an entire analysis of communism published in the late 1940s called The Sociology of Communism, translated into English, by Jules Monnereau. And he has the first section of the book is called Communism as the 20th Century Islam. Bernard Lewis wrote a brilliant essay in 1954 showing the alarming similarities between Islam and communism. And in fact, there was a joke that circulated in the 1950s amongst educated comedians, where they took the Islamic confession of faith. There is no God besides Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And they said the communist version of that was, there is no God, and Karl Marx is his prophet. I mean, so that was made into a joke, but in other words, it was part of the daily understanding.
Andy, we're laughing, and people are posting on Facebook, and I sometimes wonder if when I go on the air, if people are standing there with their, as they do when I speak to them, in person, are their jaws dropping? Do they understand that we might be able to have the plague and anthrax delivery to Israel? By the way, can those ICBMs hit the east coast of the United States?
Of course, that's what they're designed to do. And again, this is not some right-wing loons. This is our Department of Defense that has testified within the past month that no, they're talking about 2015, this capability.
What?
And again, I reiterate, we may have already seen one such missile captured in a satellite image.
Andy, it beckons me to ask the question. You're an analyst. I'm an activist, broadcaster, quasi-analyst, doing the best I can. But when I'm on the road and people say to me, "What do I do about the penetration?" I know what to do. I know your imam. We have a mobilization in many cities working on identifying Muslim Brotherhood. By the way, Twitter rally tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, protesting Muslim Brotherhood on Capitol Hill. If you are interested in joining, and you do not need to know Twitter, please go to my website, lisabensonradioshow.com. Click there, send me a message, and I will tell you how to get on. We must have all hands on deck tomorrow to fight the Muslim Brotherhood in America. But when we're talking about ICBMs and this treaty, what might happen with the Corker-Menendez bill, in your opinion?
Again, I think it's basically a stopgap measure. Lisa, what really needs to be done is that these sham negotiations need to be terminated altogether, and there has to be a serious discussion. Again, al-Husseini, who we discussed at the beginning of the show, the so-called moderate Iranian analyst, laid the cards on the table. They are at war with us. And so there is only a tactical military solution to Iran's nuclear infrastructure and capabilities. And by the way, there's an excellent book I would recommend to your entire audience to read. It's a very staid and dispassionate, really a monograph called A Time to Attack by Matt Koenig, who used to work for the Obama administration. He's an analyst, and he's a non-proliferation expert. And Matt has concluded that what needs to be done, given the way these negotiations are going, and he wrote the book in last May, so he was more hopeful then. He's less hopeful now. But be that as it may, given the trajectory of these negotiations, Matt argues for a tactical military strike on the 4 known facilities in Iran, combined cruise missile and B-2 bombing strikes. The facilities are 2 of them are above ground. The Arak plutonium reactor, the Isfahan ore processing, uranium ore processing plant, and then the more embedded sites at Fordo, which everyone's heard about now, and also at Natanz. Those uranium enrichment sites. One evening of combined cruise missile and B-2 bomber strikes could, if not completely destroy, certainly completely destroy the surface facilities, set back the Iranian program at least 5 years, And these are not population centers. The casualties that would be there would be the people that are, developing these systems. And so be it.
By who? The United States or Israel?
Absolutely should be by the United States. What Matt points out is that Israel has much less capability. Yes, they've proven they can take out surface facilities, and they probably could do it again in Iran, although it's a logistical nightmare in terms of where these facilities are. But they have no capability, for example, that we know of taking out the deeply embedded 300-foot below the surface Fordo facility. They might be able to do some damage to the Natanz facility, which is about 70 feet below the surface, from what I understand. But it's really a stopgap measure that would maybe afford a couple of years of setting back the program. It's really our moral obligation. I mean, after all, yes, I know from the title of my book, but Iran is at war with us. Israel is only the little Satan. Israel is only a stepping stone. We're the main target.
I wanted to mention that, by the way. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, the book says the final solution for Israel, but the whole time I was reading the book, I'm thinking it's the final solution for all of us who are
for Western civilization.
For Western civilization. Andy, if anyone, we've got a few more minutes, 602-508-0960. This is a deep conversation. We're Jewish, we're Americans, we're living under this threat. We've heard from Hillary Clinton today. We may not be able to penetrate this narrative that she has. Does that concern you?
Oh, of course it does. Of course it does. But again, you're familiar with the book. I think this has been a bipartisan failure of imagination. And I think we need a real house cleaning in terms of our policymaking circles. Just real quickly, apparently Prime Minister Olmert, remember Olmert, who actually did take out the Syrian reactor.
Let's just make sure that, because we have people who may not know Olmert.
Yeah, Prime Minister Olmert in 2007 took out the Syrian reactor. He requested flyover rights over Iraq when we totally controlled Iraqi airspace to go after the known Iranian facilities at that point. And Bill Gates, former Secretary of Defense, crows in his memoir that he helped convince Bush to not to allow the flyover rights. And Lisa, the reason given was that might undo the great gains of the surge, which of course have disappeared altogether. So I say that this has been a bipartisan failure of imagination. Of course, what's happening now, as I mentioned earlier, is worse than what happened under the Bush II administration. At least to Bush's credit, he did not sit down and engage in these negotiations with Iran, which essentially gives legitimacy to their so-called right to enrich uranium.
Well, we're talking in the last 2 minutes, Andy, we're having this conversation about potentially ICBMs and nukes and missiles hitting the United States and Israel simultaneously with the plague, with anthrax, with smallpox, with nuclear. And we are sitting here saying to ourselves, I don't know how to get people to react to this. It's time to barnstorm D.C. and tell our lawmakers who refuse to have a conversation on Islamic doctrine. And this is the basis.
But you see, that's so critical, Lisa, because then they can throw out these really hideous canards that if a brave young senator like Tom Cotton even mentions that the possibility of tactical strikes, he's a warmonger. Excuse me, they've been at war with us for 36 years counting. Period. Jihad. It doesn't go away. It's like B.B. King used to say about the blues. The blues don't never end, okay? Jihad don't never end.
We've got to go, Andy. And this has been, I could stay online with you for another hour. It's been quite an honor to have you. I'm sorry it's taken so long. Folks, please read Andy Bostom's blog every day. I'll be reposting your work, Andy. Thank you for joining us and taking time. God bless you, Andy. Be safe.